Today, possibly more than at any other time, women are led to feel that the body's quietude is an indicator of absence, a void, or an emotional shortcoming. But what if the reality is precisely the reverse? What if that quietude is the soul's initial whisper? When a woman, whether consciously or not, decides to step back from the theatrics of desire and the confines of superficial attachments, something more profound starts to surface from her core. This is not a void, but a presence. Not a deficiency, but an expansion. Carl Jung might have said that all suppressed energy discovers a new channel for manifestation, and once the body is no longer sidetracked by instant gratification, the soul is finally given the room to speak. Have you ever considered why a multitude of women, following phases of abstinence, describe an unforeseen spiritual revelation, a keener sensitivity, more lucid dreams, and more precise intuitions? It is no mere coincidence. It is a summons. The body, when deprived of external contact, starts to turn inward. And it is in that territory, long neglected, that the woman discovers aspects of herself that were previously unseen, both by her and by anyone else. This isn't merely about celibacy. It is about transmutation, concerning an energy that ceases to search in others for what can only be nurtured within. Society, programmed by a paradigm of perpetual sexual validation, is unnerved by the woman who pulls back because she grows unpredictable, enigmatic, and untouchable. And even more so, because she starts to perceive, to see past the games, beyond the emotional cycles, beyond the facade of relationships that confine more than they liberate. Jung would label this an encounter with the shadow, a juncture where the woman ceases to seek being selected and starts to select. Not loving to be loved in return, but loving herself with such force that everything shallow dissipates on its own. There is a form of silence that is not a void. It is a sanctuary. And when the body pauses, it is because the soul is on the verge of kindling a light that is unsettling. A woman who lives without sex or relationships is not lifeless inside. She might be more vibrant than ever before. What appears as absence is, in fact, a profusion of inner presence. What appears as loneliness is a profound communion with something that no passion could ever touch. It is within that space that the archetype of the wild woman is stirred, the one who reconnects to her ancestral knowledge, her unadulterated instinct, the feminine principle that requires no spectators. Can you sense it? This summons is not for all. It is for those who are weary of bartering their essence for fleeting moments of inauthentic connection. It is for those who realize that what they genuinely search for is not in any person's bed, but in a fundamental encounter with their own selves. And if you have come this far, you are perhaps nearer to that path than you realize. Yes, the body goes quiet, but that is not a weakness. It is strength gathering itself to become power. And once the soul starts to speak, there is no going back. Because a woman who has listened to her soul will never again be content with the muted volume of a conventional love. There arrives a time in the life of every woman when the clamor of the world grows intolerable. Not the external clamor, but the internal whisper of expectations that are not her own, desires she was conditioned to feel, and affections presented as undeniable truths. It is in this profound state of weariness, nearly imperceptible to others, that the journey back to herself commences. Carl Jung stated that whatever we deny in ourselves comes back to us as destiny. And maybe that is the reason why, when the body opts for silence, it isn't a failure. It is an indication that something larger is attempting to surface. The woman who starts to pull away from the impulses that once steered her, without entirely grasping why, is already heeding a silent call that originates not from the flesh, but from the soul. That woman, even without knowing it, starts to experience a longing that has no name. It is not a nostalgia for a man, a touch, or a night of passion. It is a nostalgia for herself, for a destination she has not yet visited, but is certain exists. In this framework, abstinence is not a form of punishment. It is a gateway. And in passing through it, she embarks on what Jung termed the process of individuation, a radical journey toward wholeness, where she sheds the projections she had placed on others to finally see herself. The emptiness that emerges is not an absence. It is a space being cleared for something more genuine to be born. It is in this space that memories start to ache differently, not as unhealed wounds, but as pointers to a grander narrative. The relationships that ended, the nights that concluded in tears, the cycles that repeated without reason, all of it starts to fall into place under a new illumination. Because the woman who welcomes silence is not withdrawing from life. She is reauthoring her own narrative from a fresh vantage point. Her inner being starts to view emotions as symbolic reflections of an unconscious that was always communicating with her, but which the noise of desire had drowned out. Slowly, she learns that she no longer requires applause or external approval, that her value is not gauged by how much others covet her body, but by how profoundly she can sustain the presence of her soul in quietude. It is at this juncture that an almost mystical power is born, the power of the woman who no longer needs to be chosen. And it is here that the world starts to fear her, because it is at a loss for what to do with someone who has ceased to plead for love. She becomes complete, and thus a danger to all that remains in a state of being in halves. And when that woman starts to see that her vital energy is not dormant, merely gathered, she steps into a new plane of consciousness, a plane with no urgency and no need to prove anything. Because the silence of the body is not a penalty, it is a language, and that language can only be grasped by those courageous enough to reside in their own depths. Jung would refer to this as a reconciliation with the feminine unconscious, a reconnection with ancient symbols buried beneath centuries of suppression. And this reconciliation is achieved not with words, but with presence. That woman is only just beginning to emerge. But the path is not smooth. A sense of unease takes hold, an unseen anguish that gnaws from the inside. When a woman starts to create distance from immediate desire, from familiar touch, from the presence of another body next to hers, she also creates distance from everything that once gave her a sense of belonging. What is left, initially, is a stark discomfort, as though the world no longer acknowledges her, as though her withdrawal from the game has made her invisible. Jung would suggest this marks the start of the encounter with the shadow, the part of her she suppressed for years, which lived in a state of adaptation, hungry for validation, which now declines to continue the pretense. At this juncture, she starts to question if she erred in stepping away, if she is losing her mind, if she is squandering time, youth, and chances. Because society insists that a woman's time is limited, that she must be active, conquering, being desired, and meeting expectations. And all at once, she fits in nowhere. She is no longer the lover, the wife, the muse, or the girlfriend. She is simply herself, and that is more painful than any desertion. Abstinence now starts to feel like a penalty, but it is not. It is a trial, a symbolic passage that only souls who are prepared can withstand. Temptations surface, old habits knock on the door, easy opportunities reappear, Everything appears designed to challenge her. And the most difficult part is that no one in her circle grasps what is unfolding. Friends raise questions. Family advises her to socialize more, to not shut herself away. But it is not seclusion, it is immersion. And not all are equipped to watch someone dive deep while the rest of the world stays afloat on the surface. Jung perceived this as a necessary phase of individuation, the point where the ego grows frantic because it is ceding control, and the soul, with subtlety, starts to take charge. It is in this silent desperation that many surrender, reverting to old ways, settling for tepid love, and persuading themselves that something is preferable to nothing. But the woman who perseveres, even amidst tears and uncertainty, is being sculpted by something far grander than she is. She is being summoned to shatter the cycle. And cycles are not shattered by force. They are shattered by awareness. The tension she experiences is not an indication of a mistake, but of a transition. The cocoon constricts before the butterfly can emerge, and that is what is taking place. A new self is being gestated in the obscurity of silence. Deep inside, she knows it. Even if she is unable to articulate it, even if she worries she is too solitary, too misunderstood, too intense. There is a voice that does not yell but persists, a presence that does not reveal itself but stays with her. And that presence is the symbol of the archetypal feminine, the anima, which Jung depicted as the conduit between consciousness and the mysterious. It is with her that the woman starts to communicate, and the more profound that internal dialogue becomes, the more she comprehends. Her body is not on hold, it is in ritual, a ritual that the modern world has forgotten, but one her soul has always known how to navigate. And then, something changes. Subtly, almost imperceptibly. A new comprehension starts to dawn. What was previously restlessness now crystallizes into more profound questions. Why have I always required feeling desired to feel alive? Why does the absence of another feel so intolerable? What part of me still depends on the gaze of another to exist? But the transformed woman no longer uses relationships as a sedative. She no longer barters affection for companionship. And even if this means enduring long, quiet nights, she understands her body is not in abstinence. It is in a state of protection. It is safeguarding a space for something that originates from the soul, not from a sense of lack. The transformation is finished when she understands she no longer needs to be pursued. She is the nexus, the flame, the revealing light. And when that light is ignited, those unable to cope with its brightness move away. And those who approach later will not do so halfway, because the woman who has navigated through silence no longer tolerates living at a reduced intensity. She is no longer on offer for commonplace relationships because she herself is no longer common. And when the body becomes silent, it is the soul that makes the choice. And the soul, once awakened, never chooses what has previously harmed it. Then she rises, not as one re-entering the world, but as one who is becoming the world. Every step she takes is now intentional. Every decision is weighed not by the fear of solitude, but by the richness of her own company. The body that was once quiet now resonates at a new frequency, more subtle, more profound, more authentic. There is no longer a rush to fill a void, no desire to squeeze into spaces too constricting for her expanded soul. Carl Jung said that what we resist controls us, and what we integrate changes us. And this woman has finally integrated her voids. She has made deficiency her sanctuary. She has transformed silence into a sacred altar. But there is a detail few observe. she is not waiting for someone to come to her aid. Because the woman who has journeyed through her own shadows no longer requires saving. She has saved herself, and that act of self-salvation alters everything. She can no longer revert to the way things were. What was once need has become choice. What was once impulse is now discernment. She can love, certainly, but she no longer loves out of necessity, but from a place of surplus. And when that love appears, it will not be to make her whole. It will be to walk alongside her. Her soul is already complete. This new state awakens something deep, a sense of mission, of purpose, of clarity. She grasps that her experience was not merely personal, it was symbolic. That her silenced body is a stand-in for all those women who were also instructed to be dependent, to distract themselves, to capitulate. And now she feels an urge to be a lighthouse, not to show the path, but to ignite the fire. Because only someone who has discovered herself in the dark can show others not to fear it. Jung would describe this as the manifestation of the self, when the soul no longer wishes to be accepted, but to be expressed. Everything she let go of on the way, the old loves, the fragile iterations of herself, the relationships where she had to diminish herself to belong, no longer stings in the same way. Now, every loss feels like a liberation. Every absence feels like an answered prayer. Because the woman who endured an abstinence of the flesh has discovered a nourishment of the soul. And that nourishment sustains her from within. Nothing from the outside will ever be sufficient unless it resonates with what already thrives inside. And so, she readies herself, not to step back into old roles, but to occupy a new position in the world, a position where her presence is sufficient, where her voice has substance, where her silence is revered. And when her body desires once more, it will be a sacred decision, not an emotional dependency. When love comes knocking, it will not meet a woman in need. It will meet a woman who is full, complete, and prepared. And until that moment, she remains steadfast, not in abstinence, but in a state of vigil, because now she understands. Yes, the body is quiet, but it is the soul that is finally speaking. There are silences that appear cold but shelter glowing embers. There are absences that, from an external view, look like loss, but are, within, a fertile ground. And there are women who, upon withdrawing from the world, do not go out. They catch fire on a different plane. When the body goes quiet, it does not perish. It becomes an altar, a consecrated space where the soul finally gathers the courage to speak. And all that once seemed like a deficiency of life now reveals itself as a divine presence, gestating a new identity, more lucid, more rare, more whole. Nothing that is lived is ever lost. Everything is transmuted. Desire, once a matter of urgency, becomes a choice. Pain, once a wound, becomes a scar of wisdom. The woman who navigates abstinence with consciousness is not distancing herself from love. She is learning to love from a place where hunger no longer exists, only abundance. And in that quiet abundance, she becomes invulnerable, not because no one can get to her, but because no one can manipulate her any longer. Can you feel the echo of this journey within you, the nameless nostalgia, the unease of no longer fitting where you once felt secure, the urge to retreat without knowing precisely why? That is not weakness. It is the initial call. Perhaps this video has not reached you by chance. Perhaps it is a reflection of something that has long been stirring inside you, but had not yet been given a clear name. And now that it has, something has shifted. If this path has touched upon a forgotten aspect of who you are, give yourself permission to proceed. Do not extinguish the spark that has been kindled. Share this message with someone who also feels her body has gone quiet, but does not yet grasp the reason. Leave a comment to tell us how this resonated with you. And if you would like to continue walking with us in this same depth and truth, subscribe to the channel here. Every word is a seed. Every silence is fertile ground. And every video is a ritual. Because in the end, this is what endures. A woman who has learned to listen to what the soul whispers when the world is too noisy. And that whisper says, "You are not alone. You are awakening."